She told herself she stayed because the money was good. That was the cleanest lie she had ever processed, and in 3 years working for Aldric Mast, she had processed thousands of clean lies. She was very good at it. The Gulf Coast humidity pressed against the plate glass of the 14th floor office like something alive. Carys Lund sat at her desk with a black coffee going cold at her elbow, running a reconciliation on the Port Authority invoices from the week before. Shell company on the left, shell company on the right. The actual cargo in between, neatly laundered into a number that could sit in a quarterly report without drawing attention. This was her skill set. Not the violence, not the negotiations, not the hierarchy of threats that kept the syndicate's Gulf operation intact. Just the numbers. Just the paper that made the whole blood-soaked machinery look like legitimate enterprise. The heavy office door behind her opened without a knock. People knocked for Mast. Everyone knocked. The lieutenants, the lawyers, the city officials who came with their hands out and their eyes down. Carys had stopped knocking 18 months in when she understood that the ritual communicated uncertainty, and uncertainty was the one thing she could not afford in this building. The Meridian dry dock invoices. His voice was the same every morning, low without inflection, like water moving under ice. There's a gap in the fuel receipts for the 3rd week of October. Carys didn't look up. She pulled a tabbed folder from the left side of her desk and held it out without turning. Pages 7 through 11. The discrepancy is a timing error. The fuel supplier billed on the 23rd, payment cleared on the 31st. It falls across 2 reporting periods. She finally looked up. I've already reconciled it. It's in your inbox. Mast stood at the edge of her workspace the way he always did. Not crowding her desk, not hovering, just present. He was a large man with the posture of someone who had spent a long time making himself comfortable taking up space. A scar ran along his left jaw from something old, pale and flat like a watermark. He was 42 and he looked like every year of it had asked him something difficult. He took the folder, glanced at the first page, and set it back on her desk with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Good, he said. That was it. That was the whole review. He called her Lund, never Carys, never anything familiar. She called him Mr. Mast and had since day one, when the man who recruited her had said, with a significance she hadn't yet understood, that she should take her cues from him. If he wanted warmth, he'd ask for it. He never had. She was 29 years old. She had a degree from a community college in a town she had left at 18, with $60 and a used graphing calculator. She knew how to find the place where a number stopped being a number and became a cover story. That was what Mast had hired. Not her loyalty, not her silence, but her specific and particular brain. He paid her enough that she didn't have to make the kind of side arrangements that got people killed in this business. He paid her to be a closed system. It was a rational arrangement. She had no illusions about what it was. At 4:30 on a Thursday, she gathered her bag from under the desk. I need to leave by 5 today, Carys said. She kept her voice neutral. I'll finish the Harmon Trust filings in the morning. Mast was at the window, watching the port below where one of the freight operations was running a late load. He turned his head slightly. Not enough to look at her directly. Something come up? A personal appointment. The silence stretched 2 full beats longer than it should have. Fine, he said. He turned back to the window. She left at 5:05. She did not notice that he stayed at the window until her car cleared the parking structure. His name was Brett Harwick. She had met him at the public library on a Wednesday afternoon 4 months ago, the Rosenberg branch, which still had good light and almost nobody there at 3 in the afternoon. On a weekday he was an architect with a small firm downtown, the kind of person who had student loans and a carefully maintained optimism about the future. He made her laugh. That was not a small thing. She didn't laugh easily. The restaurant was a bayfront place near the Strand, with string lights outside and a chalk menu board and fish tacos that cost $14 and were worth it. She wore a blue dress she had bought the previous spring and not had occasion to wear. She left her hair down, which she didn't usually do in the office because loose hair communicated a kind of carelessness she couldn't afford. Brett was already there when she arrived. He stood up when he saw her, which she found old-fashioned in a way she hadn't expected to like. They talked for 2 hours. He told her about a mixed-use project his firm had bid on near the seawall. She told him about her job the way she always did. Private financial consulting for a holdings company. He didn't push. He refilled her water glass when it got low and didn't make it mean anything, which somehow made it mean something. When the check came, his hand covered hers briefly on the table, warm and uncalculated. She drove home with the windows down. She didn't know that the morning security report was on Mast's desk by 6 a.m. She had never asked about the surveillance protocols for syndicate staff, because asking questions about your own surveillance was the kind of thing that signaled you had something to hide. She had learned early that the safest posture in this organization was radical transparency about everything she was authorized to know, and complete silence about everything she wasn't. She found out a different way. She found out the way she always found out anything, through the numbers. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the dinner with Brett, when the work came across her desk that changed the shape of everything. She was auditing a stack of city contractor filings, routine due diligence on a legitimate development deal. Mast was brokering through one of his cleaner shells. 14 pages in, she stopped. The name was in a footnote. Harwick Design Group LLC, flagged by the city's zoning review board for an irregular variance application on a seawall-adjacent commercial project. The flag was dated the previous Monday, 1 week after her dinner. She stared at the page. She pulled the full chain on the flagged variance. It took her 11 minutes, which was not a long time for a 10-year paper trail, but was very long by her standards because her hands had developed a tremor that she controlled by pressing her fingertips flat against the desk and breathing through her nose. The flag routed back to a complaint filed by a community review board, which was funded in part by a neighborhood development non-profit, which had received a substantial donation the previous Tuesday from a holding company registered in Galveston. The holding company was one of 4 subsidiaries of a real estate trust that Carys herself had incorporated 8 months ago. For Mast. She sat very still. She printed the flagging report. She highlighted the footnote in yellow, the same yellow she used when she needed Mast to see a number he was trying to ignore. She picked up the sheet of paper and she walked to his office, and she did not knock. He was on the phone when she came in, standing at the window again, because that was where he always was. He held up one finger. "Give me a minute." She waited. She stood in front of his desk and watched the light on the Gulf through the glass and kept her face entirely still, because she had learned that in rooms like this, your face was the first thing they read. He ended the call. He turned. "You look like you found something," Mast said. "I did." She placed the report on the center of his desk and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. He looked down. He saw the highlight. He saw the name. His face did not change. That was the thing about Mast. His face was a document with no accessible metadata. He had spent decades building the blankness. It was complete and professional, and it used to terrify her. Used to. "Harwick Design Group," she said. "The flagged variance routes back through the Galveston Trust. My Galveston Trust. The one I built for you." Mast picked up his coffee. He took a sip. He set it down precisely where it had been. "It's a zoning complaint. We flag irregularities in the development corridor all the time." "There was no irregularity," Carys said. "I pulled the original variance application. It was a minor setback miscalculation on a seawall-adjacent build, the kind of thing that gets corrected at the first review meeting with a $50 filing fee." She tilted her head slightly. "Someone made it into something much larger. Development is complicated. Mr. Mast." She said his name the way she said the number when the number was wrong, cleanly, without emotion, with the finality of a ledger that won't balance. "Brett Harwick took me to dinner 3 Thursdays ago. The Monday after that, His variance application became a formal investigation. His city contract was put on hold the following Friday. Tell me that's a coincidence. The silence in the office was the same silence that fell right before Mast said something that couldn't be taken back. He didn't answer. That was its own answer. You had no right, she said. He had his hand over yours. The words came out flat, not defensive, not cruel, just factual, the way Mast delivered everything, like a line item in a ledger of things that had happened and could not unhappen. On the table, he covered your hand. Carys absorbed that. She absorbed the fact that he had known exactly who Brett was, and exactly when it had happened, which meant she had been in a report. She had been a line item on his desk. That doesn't belong to you, she said. He looked at her. His eyes were unreadable, the way deep harbor water was unreadable. Not because there was nothing beneath the surface, but because you couldn't see the bottom from where you stood. Doesn't it? He said quietly. No. She picked up the report and folded it once precisely and placed it in the pocket of her bag. I want that investigation dropped, the variance complaint withdrawn and the city contract reinstated. You are going to fix what you broke. She reached into her bag and set a second document on his desk. She had prepared it that morning before she had walked in here, a standard separation agreement, drafted from the template she had used for 3 other staff transitions. And if you won't, I resign, effective immediately. Mast stared at the document. She didn't wait. She picked up her bag and walked to the door. He said nothing. The door closed behind her. She got a job at a CPA firm on Market Street within 10 days. The salary was 1/3 of what she had been making, but it was legitimate, and the office smelled like coffee and carpet shampoo. Her new boss shook her hand and said they valued work-life balance, and she nodded as though she knew exactly what that meant and what it felt like to want it. She went home at 5:30 every evening. She slept for 8 hours. She watched 3 different colleagues file documents in the wrong order and said nothing, because correcting them wasn't her job, and she was committed to having a job with clear edges and a known perimeter. She did not check her encrypted phone. She had turned it off and put it in a kitchen drawer. She did not think about the numbers on Mast's port manifests, or which shell company was going to misfile the Q4 retention reports if someone didn't catch it by the 15th. She tried not to, anyway. On a Wednesday night 14 days after she resigned, someone knocked on her door. She looked through the peephole. It was Dov. He was Mast's head of ground operations, a quiet man in his 50s, who had driven her to 3 emergency port meetings at 2 in the morning without ever once making her feel like she was in danger. His shirt was torn at the collar, and he was pressing his forearm against his left side in the particular way people pressed wounds. She opened the door. I know you're out, Dov said immediately. I know. I wouldn't be here if there was anyone else. Come inside. She stepped back. Sit at the table, not the couch. What happened? A crew out of Houston that's been watching the port contracts made a move tonight. 2 of ours went down. He sat heavily in the kitchen chair. Mast got hit. He got out. He's at the old fish processing building on the causeway, the one registered under the Barnard Trust. She knew it. She had filed the Barnard Trust herself. She knew every building Mast held, every address. How bad? Side, below the ribs. Dov's jaw was tight. He won't let the doctor near him. He put a gun on the man I brought and told him to leave. He's been sitting there 2 hours. Why won't he let anyone in? Dov looked at her with the patient, exhausted expression of a man who had spent a long time watching 2 people, refused to understand something obvious. Because the only person he ever let close to him walked out, he said. She went to her hall closet and took down the emergency kit from the top shelf. The real one, not the bandages and aspirin version, but the one she had assembled 2 years ago after watching a man bleed out in a parking garage, and understanding that this job had specific practical requirements. She had carried it out when she resigned, out of habit or something she wasn't ready to name. She grabbed her jacket. Can you drive? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Then let's go. The fish processing building had been closed for 6 years. It smelled like salt and old machinery, and the particular silence of a place that used to be full of noise. Carys followed Dov through the dark to the back office, where a single work light ran off a generator. Mast was on a folding cot in the corner. He had his shirt off. The wound was below his left ribs, ugly and still seeping, and he was pressing a folded cloth against it with the flat, impersonal efficiency of a man changing a tire. His face was grey under the work light. His eyes were closed. When she stepped through the door, they opened. He looked at her for a long moment, the way a person looked at something they had decided they would not let themselves want anymore. "No," he said. His voice was very low. "Dov," I said. Dov made his own call. She set the kit on the workbench and unzipped it. "Lean back." "You resigned." "I'm aware. Lean back, Mast." He leaned back. She worked without talking. The generator hummed. She could feel the tension running through him in the rigid stillness of his breathing. He had a very high threshold for pain and a very low threshold for showing weakness, both of which she had already known. He watched her hands. "The investigation was dropped," he said after a while. She paused, then she kept working. "I know," she said. "I checked. Brett called me. He said the whole thing disappeared and he didn't understand why." "Did you tell him?" "No." She taped the last section of the closure bandage and peeled off her gloves. She sat on the edge of the workbench and looked at him. He looked older in this light. He looked like what he actually was, a man who had been making violent decisions for 20 years and had arrived somewhere the math no longer worked the way it used to. "Why did you do it?" she said. "The real reason." He looked at the ceiling. "Because he touched your hand," Mast said, "and I understood exactly what it meant, and I could not tolerate what it meant." "What did it mean?" A pause. "That you had someone outside of this." His voice was very level, the way it got when he was controlling something carefully. "Outside of me." Carys looked at him for a long time. She had spent 3 years in that office. She had learned his silences and his tells and the specific pitch his voice took when something genuinely concerned him, as opposed to when he was performing concern for effect. She knew him the way you knew a building you had lived in long enough to find every door that stuck and every floor that creaked. She had told herself that was professional familiarity. She was done telling herself convenient things. "You cost me a job I'd had for 3 years," she said. "You cost Brett Harwick 4 weeks of serious professional damage that he did not deserve. You cost me 3 weeks of very bad sleep." She held his gaze. "And your operation cracked while you were distracted." "Yes," Mast said. "I want a partnership." He blinked. She filed that it was rare. "Not an employment contract. A formal operational partnership. I hold equity in 2 of the shell structures. I'm a named partner in the legitimate holding company. I have autonomous authority over the financial side of the operation. No approval required. No override." She crossed her arms. "And you never, under any circumstances, move against anyone in my personal life without my knowledge and explicit agreement. Those are the terms." Mast stared at her. "You're negotiating," he said, "while I'm bleeding. You always said the best time to negotiate is when the other party's options are limited." She raised an eyebrow. "Your options are limited." Something moved across his face. It wasn't quite a smile. It was what she thought a smile might look like after a very long time without practice. "The equity structure is aggressive," he said. "You destroyed a Man City contract because he bought me a glass of wine. The terms are fair." A silence. The generator hummed. "All right," Mast said. She looked at him. "That's it, all right?" "I've been doing this for 20 years. He held her gaze, and for once there was nothing managed in it, just the direct and ungovernable fact of what he was looking at her with. "I know when I'm in a position of debt. I know when the other party holds the leverage." "You hold it, Carys." A pause. "Whatever you want." She studied his face. She thought about the job on Market Street, and the carpet shampoo smell, and the 8-hour nights, and the 3 colleagues who filed documents wrong. She thought about 3 years of port manifests and midnight calls and the specific, steady satisfaction of being the most competent person in every room she entered. She thought about the only job she'd ever had where the stakes were actual, and her brain was the thing that kept it from falling apart. She thought, with more clarity than she had allowed herself in 3 weeks, about what it had felt like when he'd said outside of me. Like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed. "Go to the hospital tomorrow morning," she said, standing. "First thing. You call your doctor, and you get properly looked at. Not here, not tonight. That's your first demand. That's non-negotiable." He looked at her, and the rest? "The rest we put in writing with an attorney, not one of yours." The sound he made was low and rough, not quite a laugh, but closer to one than anything she had heard from him in 3 years. He winced immediately. "You're not what I expected," he said, "when I hired you." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would be afraid of me. Someone who would go quiet when it got complicated." He paused. "Someone who wouldn't come back." Carys picked up the kit and zipped it closed. She looked at the man on the cot, the scar and the grey at his temples, and the careful, worn eyes of someone who had spent decades surrounded by people who wanted things from him and had mostly forgotten that wanting didn't have to work that way. "I didn't leave because it got complicated," she said. "I left because you made a decision about my life without asking me." She held his gaze steady. "Ask, next time." He looked at her like she had said something in a language he hadn't known was still available to him. "Good night, Mast." She walked out. Dov was in the hallway, and she could tell from his expression that he had heard enough. "Make sure he actually goes to the hospital," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Dov said. She drove home along the causeway with the windows down. The Gulf air was warm and heavy with salt. She thought about the partnership structure, which shells had the cleanest paper history, how to document the equity split in a way that was legally defensible. What kind of independent attorney could handle this without asking questions they weren't entitled to ask? She thought about it the way she thought about everything that mattered. Precisely, thoroughly, without flinching. She tried not to think about the way he had looked at her when she said, "Ask next time." She failed. Some accounts, she was beginning to understand, could not be reconciled the ordinary way. Some figures refused to fit in the column you assigned them, and the only honest accounting was to open a new ledger. She had built herself from nothing. She had walked into the most dangerous room in the city and made herself the person they couldn't operate without. She was going back. She had known that before she ever picked up the first aid kit, before she confirmed the Callahan investigation had been dropped, before she felt something in her chest ease when the news came through that Brett's contract had been reinstated. She was going back, but she was going back as a partner. She pulled into her parking spot and sat for a moment with the engine off. She wasn't walking into a cage. She was writing the terms. There's a difference between being claimed and claiming something in return. Between being the one who burns the city down and being the one who decides what gets rebuilt. Carys Lund had spent 3 years being the most necessary person in a dangerous man's world, without ever making him acknowledge the cost of that necessity. The bill was due. She was very good at collecting. If this story made your pulse spike, you're in the right place. Hit like, subscribe to Mafia Heart Stories, and come back for what happens when a woman who knows where every body is buried decides she wants a seat at the table, not just a desk outside it.